The dust devils danced across the barren fields like ghosts mocking what used to be Nora Fenton's thriving farm. And she stood on the porch watching everything she had built with her late husband turn to ash and memory under the merciless Texas sun. The year was 1878, and the drought had stretched on for 3 years now, but it was the bank notice in her trembling hands that delivered the final blow. She had 30 days to settle her debts or lose the land entirely. Samuel had been dead for 6 months, taken by influenza during the harsh winter, and Nora had fought with everything she had to keep their dream alive. But the soil had turned to powder, the crops had failed for the third season running, and the cattle had either starved or been sold off one by one just to put food on the table. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. Her hands were calloused and cracked, her face sun-weathered beyond her years, and her heart carried a weight that seemed impossible to bear. The small farmhouse Samuel had built with his own hands stood behind her, still solid despite everything. But what good was shelter when the land could not sustain her? She had married Samuel when she was 19, fresh-faced and full of hope, believing that love and hard work could conquer anything. 5 years later, she stood alone, watching that belief crumble like the parched earth beneath her feet. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her attention from the notice. A rider was approaching from the east, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Nora squinted, one hand shading her eyes, the other clutching the bank notice against her worn calico dress. Visitors were rare these days. Most of their neighbors had already abandoned their claims, heading west to California or back east to family. Those who remained were too busy fighting their own battles to socialize. As the rider drew closer, Nora could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, his shoulders broad beneath a dusty brown vest, a worn hat pulled low over his face. A working man, she could tell from the way he moved with his horse, not against it. He led a pack mule behind him, laden with supplies. The rider slowed as he approached the fence line, or what remained of it. Samuel had been meaning to repair those posts before he died. The man dismounted with an easy grace, looping his horse's reins over what was left of the hitching post. When he removed his hat, Nora saw a strong face, tanned and lined by sun and wind, with eyes the color of creek water after rain. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Madam," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Name's Kane Fletcher. I'm looking for Samuel Fenton." Nora felt her throat tighten. "Samuel's dead, been 6 months now." Kane's expression shifted, genuine sorrow crossing his features. "I'm sorry to hear that, madam. He was a good man. You knew my husband, met him 4 years back up in Kansas. I was working a drive and he bought some of our cattle. We got to talking, and he mentioned he had land down here in Texas, near El Dorado. Said if I ever wanted to settle down, there was opportunity in these parts." Kane looked around at the desolate landscape, and Nora saw him take in the failed fields, the empty barn, the general air of desperation that hung over everything. "Looks like times have been hard." Nora folded the bank notice and tucked it into her apron pocket. "The drought, 3 years now. Crops won't grow, cattle starved off, and Samuel caught sick last winter." She straightened her spine, unwilling to show weakness to this stranger, even one who had known her husband. "What brings you all this way, Mr. Fletcher?" Kane held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly. "Like I said, Samuel spoke highly of this area. I've been working cattle drives for 10 years now, saving my money. I'm looking to buy land and start my own place. Thought I'd come see what was available, maybe talk to Samuel about what parcels might be for sale." The bitter laugh escaped Nora before she could stop it. "Well, you've come to the right place then. My land will be for sale in 30 days, whether I want it to be or not. Bank's calling in the note. Kane's eyes moved to her face, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. You trying to hold on to it, trying and failing. Can't grow crops without rain, can't raise cattle without feed, and can't make money without something to sell. Nora heard the defeat in her own voice and hated it. I'm sorry, Mr. Fletcher. I don't mean to burden you with my troubles. If you're looking for land, you should ride into El Dorado and speak with the bank manager. I'm sure he'll have plenty of foreclosed properties to show you. Kane didn't move. He stood there, looking at her and then at the land, his jaw working as though he was chewing over thoughts too large to swallow easily. Finally, he said, "What would it take to save this place?" Nora blinked. "What? To keep the bank from taking it. What would it take?" She pulled the notice back out, unfolding it with shaking hands. $300 for the back payments, and that's just to keep them from foreclosing. I'd still need seed, livestock, equipment. I sold almost everything just to eat this winter. And if you had all that, the money for the bank, seed to plant, cattle to raise, could you make a go of it? Nora felt a spark of something dangerous flutter in her chest. Hope was a luxury she could not afford. The land is good, Mr. Fletcher. It's just been beaten down by the drought. But droughts don't last forever. The aquifer is still strong. Samuel dug a deep well before he died, one of the last things he managed. If the rains come back, or even if they don't, we could irrigate from the well. Plant drought-resistant crops. Start small with the herd and build it up. She stopped herself, hearing the eagerness in her voice. But that's all just dreaming. I don't have the money and I don't have the help. Kane put his hat back on, and for a moment, Nora thought he was about to mount up and ride away, another person disappearing from her life. Instead, he reached for the pack mule's lead. You mind if I water my animals? It's been a long ride. Of course. The well's around back. She watched as Kane led his horse and mule around the side of the house. He moved with the confident economy of a man used to hard work, no wasted motion. Nora stood frozen on the porch, her mind spinning. Why had he asked her those questions? What did it matter to him whether she kept the farm or lost it? She followed him around back and found him working the pump, filling the trough that Samuel had carved from a fallen oak. The animals drank deeply, and Kane splashed some of the cool water on his face and neck, washing away the trail dust. "Madam, would you mind if I looked around a bit? I'd like to see the property if that's all right with you." Nora hesitated. It felt strange, showing a stranger around what might not be her land much longer. But what harm could it do? Go ahead. She walked with him, pointing out the boundaries, the barn that still stood sound despite being empty, the chicken coop where she kept her last 6 hens, the vegetable garden that she'd been nursing along with precious well water, growing just enough to keep herself fed. Kane asked questions, good questions that showed he understood farming and ranching. He examined the soil, the well, the structures. He stood on the highest point of her land and looked out across the surrounding territory. "Samuel chose well," he said finally. "This is good land. Higher elevation, better drainage. When the rains come back, this'll recover faster than most. If the rains come back. They always do. It's just a matter of when." Kane turned to face her, and Nora found herself unable to look away from those steady eyes. "Madam, I have a proposition for you, but I want you to hear me out before you answer." Nora's heart began to pound. "All right. I have money saved. Enough to pay off your banknote, buy seed and equipment, start a new herd. I have knowledge and experience. I've worked cattle and crops across 5 territories. What I don't have is land." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "You have land, but you're about to lose it. Together, we'd have everything we need to make this place work. You want to be partners." Nora felt hope and suspicion warring in her chest. Not exactly. Kane took a deep breath. Madam, I'm proposing marriage. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Nora gripped her hands together, pressing them against her stomach. You don't even know me. No, madam, I don't. But I knew your husband, and he spoke of you with a love that told me what kind of woman you are. I can see with my own eyes that you're strong and determined. You haven't given up, even when you had every reason to. That tells me more than a year of courting would. Kane's voice was earnest, almost pleading. I'm not offering romance, madam. I'm offering a partnership, a marriage of practical necessity. You need help to save your land. I need land to build a life. Together we could make something good here. Nora felt tears prickling at her eyes. I loved Samuel. I know, and I'm not asking you to forget him or replace him. I'm just asking you to let me help save what he built, what you both built together. This is insane. You just rode up here 20 minutes ago. Kane nodded slowly. Yes, madam, it is. But sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. You have 30 days before the bank takes everything. I'm offering you a way to keep it. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. The clink of coins was unmistakable. $300, enough for the bank. I've got more for supplies and stock, and I promise you I'll work this land like it was my own, because it would be. Nora's mind raced. It was madness. She'd buried her husband 6 months ago, and now a stranger was asking her to marry him. But when she looked at the dried-up fields, at the home she was about to lose, at the future of poverty and uncertainty that stretched before her, Kane's offer started to seem less like madness and more like providence. I need time to think, she whispered. Of course. Would you mind if I made camp nearby? I'll stay until you have an answer, one way or the other. Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched Kane lead his animals toward a grove of cottonwoods near the creek bed, one of the few spots that still held moisture. She walked back to the house on shaking legs and sank into Samuel's old chair on the porch. Marriage, to a stranger. It felt like a betrayal of everything she and Samuel had shared. But Samuel was gone, and he would not want her to lose their land out of sentiment. He had been a practical man. He would have understood the necessity of what Kane was offering. She thought about the alternative. Losing the farm, moving to town to find work. She could try to get a position as a seamstress or a laundress, living in a boarding house, alone and poor for the rest of her life. Or she could accept Kane's proposal and fight for the life she and Samuel had dreamed of, even if it meant sharing that dream with someone new. The sun was setting when Nora finally stood up. She had made her decision, though her heart trembled with the weight of it. She walked toward the cottonwoods and found Kane sitting on his bedroll, heating coffee over a small fire. He stood when he saw her approaching. Madam, Nora, my name is Nora. Nora, he repeated, and she liked the sound of her name in his low voice. I need to know something first. Why did you really come here? Was it just to buy land, or did Samuel ask you to look after me? Kane met her eyes. When I met Samuel 4 years ago, he never mentioned having a wife. He just talked about his land and his plans. I came here because I'm tired of drifting, tired of working other men's cattle and sleeping under other men's stars. I want something of my own. But when I learned he'd passed, when I saw you standing there so determined despite everything working against you, I knew I'd found something worth fighting for. You don't know me, Nora repeated. No, but I'd like to. She took a deep breath. If I agree to this, I need your word on some things. Name them. This farm stays in my name. You can add yours to the deed, but mine stays on it. If something happens to you, I don't want some distant relative showing up to claim my land. Fair enough. We share the work and the profits equally. I'm not looking to be taken care of. I'm looking for a partner, like you said. That's what I want too. And I need time. I buried my husband 6 months ago. I can't just forget him and play the happy bride. Kane nodded slowly. I understand. I'm not asking you to love me, Nora. I'm asking you to work beside me. If something more grows from that in time, then we'll be blessed. If not, we'll still have a working ranch and a roof over our heads. That's more than most people have. Nora extended her hand. Then yes, Kane Fletcher. I'll marry you. Kane took her hand, his grip warm and calloused, a working man's hand. Thank you. You won't regret this. I hope you're right. They rode into El Dorado the next morning, a town that had seen better days but still clung to its hopes of growth and prosperity. The main street was lined with weathered storefronts, a saloon, a general store, a church, and the bank that held Nora's fate in its ledgers. Kane tied up their horses outside the bank while Nora smoothed her dress, the best one she owned, though it was faded and had been mended more than once. They walked inside together, and Nora felt the eyes of the clerk on them immediately. Mrs. Fenton, the young man said, his voice carrying false sympathy. I didn't expect to see you so soon. The payment isn't due for another month. I'm here to settle the account, Nora said, her voice steady. This is Kane Fletcher, my fiancé. The clerk's eyebrows rose. Fiancé? My, that was fast. Kane stepped forward, placing the leather pouch on the counter with a solid thunk. $300. That should cover the back payments and bring the note current. And who might you be? I told you. Kane Fletcher. Once Nora and I are married, I'll be taking over the management of the Fenton property. The clerk called for the bank manager, a portly man named Atwood who looked disappointed to see the money on his counter. He had probably already been making plans for the land once the foreclosure went through. Well, Mrs. Fenton, this is unexpected, though I must say your timing is fortunate. Another week and we would have begun legal proceedings. Count it, Kane said, his voice carrying an edge that made both Atwood and the clerk snap to attention. They counted carefully, making note of each coin and bill. Finally, Atwood nodded. It's all here. I'll prepare the paperwork showing the account is current. Though I should mention, the next payment will be due in 6 months. We'll be ready, Nora said, though her stomach clenched at the thought. Paying off the back debt was one thing. Keeping up with future payments would require making the farm profitable again, and that was far from guaranteed. As they left the bank, Kane touched her elbow gently. We should stop by the general store. I want to order seed and supplies, and we need to see the preacher. The preacher. Nora had been trying not to think about that part. The sooner we're married, the sooner we can get to work. Unless you want to wait. Nora shook her head. Waiting would only make it harder. No, let's do it today. The preacher was an old man named Reverend Marsh who had been serving El Dorado's faithful for 20 years. He looked surprised to see Nora with a man he didn't recognize but recovered quickly. Mrs. Fenton, how can I help you? We'd like to be married, Reverend. Today, if possible. Reverend Marsh's bushy eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Today. But my dear, Samuel has only been gone 6 months. I'm aware of that, Reverend. But circumstances require quick action. This is Kane Fletcher. He's agreed to help me save the farm, and we've decided marriage is the best way to make that partnership work. The old preacher looked at Kane, taking his measure. Young man, do you love this woman? Kane didn't hesitate. I respect her greatly, sir. Love may come in time, God willing. But right now she needs help and I'm in a position to give it. I'll treat her well and honor her as my wife. That I can promise. Reverend Marsh sighed. I've married couples for all sorts of reasons over the years. Love, land, legitimizing children, escaping bad situations. Who am I to judge what God might bless? He turned to Nora. Are you certain, child? I am. Then I'll need witnesses. Let me fetch my wife and the church deacon. 20 minutes later, Nora found herself standing in the small church, her hand in Kane's, repeating vows she never thought she'd say again. The words felt strange in her mouth, both familiar and foreign. When Reverend Marsh pronounced them husband and wife, Kane leaned in and kissed her cheek gently, respectfully, and Nora felt tears slip down her face. "For Samuel," Kane whispered. "And for us," Nora found herself saying. "For the future." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the general store, and Nora watched in amazement as Kane placed orders for seed, equipment, lumber, fence posts, and supplies. He paid in cash, negotiating fair prices but not hesitating to spend what was needed. The storekeeper promised delivery within the week. "We'll start with winter wheat," Kane explained as they rode back to the farm. "It's drought-resistant and can handle the Texas weather. We'll plant sorghum too and alfalfa. Good feed crops that we can use for livestock. Speaking of which, I know a man up in Kansas who owes me a favor. I'll send him a telegram. He can drive some starter cattle down here, good breeding stock." Nora listened, her mind spinning with the speed at which her life was changing. Yesterday she had been alone and facing ruin. Today she was married and listening to her new husband make plans to rebuild everything she'd lost. When they reached the farm, Kane unloaded his belongings from the pack mule and stood uncertainly in the yard. "Where should I put my things?" Nora understood what he was really asking. "The bedroom is upstairs. There's a guest room down here that Samuel used as an office. You can take that." Relief flickered across Kane's face. "Thank you for understanding. You were honest about what this marriage was. I appreciate that." Over the next weeks, Nora watched her farm transform. Kane worked from sunup to sundown, repairing fences, clearing irrigation ditches, preparing fields for planting. The supplies arrived from town, and Kane began the careful work of planting the winter wheat, spacing it precisely, managing the precious water from the well. Nora worked beside him, her hands remembering the rhythms of farm work she'd almost forgotten in the desperate struggle just to survive. Together they fixed the barn, reinforced the chicken coop, and prepared for the cattle that would arrive before winter. They fell into a routine. Nora woke before dawn to prepare breakfast while Kane tended the animals. They worked together through the day, breaking for a simple lunch, then continuing until darkness forced them to stop. Nora cooked dinner while Kane cleaned up, and they ate together at the kitchen table, talking about the work that had been done and the work that lay ahead. At night, they retired to their separate rooms, and Nora lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in her house. It was strange having Kane there. He was respectful, almost formal, careful not to intrude on her space or her grief. But gradually, Nora found herself noticing things about him. The way he was gentle with the animals, the care he took in his work, the quiet strength in his presence. One evening, about a month after their marriage, Nora was cooking dinner when Kane came in from the fields earlier than usual. She looked up in surprise. "Something wrong?" "No. I just thought if you didn't mind, we could sit on the porch after dinner, watch the sunset." It's been a while since I took time to appreciate a good sunset. Nora found herself smiling. "I'd like that." They ate their meal of beans and cornbread, then carried their coffee out to the porch. The sun was painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink, and a slight breeze had picked up, bringing a hint of coolness to the evening air. "The wheat's coming up strong," Kane said. "Another few weeks and we'll see real growth." "You've worked miracles here," Nora said quietly. "I never could have done this alone. You were doing fine before I showed up. You just needed help. I was failing." Kane turned to look at her. "You were surviving. There's a difference. A lot of people would have given up long before you did." Nora met his eyes and felt something shift inside her. This man, this stranger who had ridden into her life barely a month ago, had saved everything she held dear. But more than that, he had treated her with a respect and kindness that touched something deep in her heart. "Why did you really do this, Kane? There must have been easier ways to get land." Kane was quiet for a long moment. "You want the truth, always. When I saw you standing on that porch, so determined despite everything you'd lost, I saw someone worth knowing, someone worth building a life with. I've spent 10 years drifting, never putting down roots, never letting myself care about anything except the next job and the pay at the end. But I'm 28 years old, Nora. I want more than that. I want a home, a purpose, and maybe someday a family." Nora felt her breath catch. "You want children, someday, if you did. But I know you're still mourning Samuel. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give." "Samuel and I wanted children," Nora admitted. "But I never got pregnant. 5 years of marriage and nothing. Maybe I can't have them. Or maybe it just wasn't the right time. God's timing isn't always our timing." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Nora realized with a start that she had just had the most personal conversation she'd ever had with Kane. They had talked about work, about the farm, about practical things. But this was different. This was real. The cattle arrived in early November, driven down from Kansas by a weathered cowboy named Jake, who Kane had worked with years before. 30 head of good breeding stock, young and healthy, worth far more than Kane had paid for them. "You saved my life once," Jake said to Kane as they settled the cattle into the pasture. "This doesn't even come close to repaying that debt." Nora watched Kane deflect the thanks with typical modesty, and later, as they were preparing for bed, she asked him about it. "What did you do for Jake?" Kane was quiet for a moment. "Stampede 5 years back. His horse went down and he would have been trampled. I got him out of the way. Lost my own horse in the process and nearly got trampled myself. It wasn't anything special. Jake seems to think it was. Jake's a good friend. Good friends make things bigger than they are." But Nora was starting to see a pattern. Kane was the kind of man who helped others without expecting anything in return, who saw needs and filled them quietly, who worked hard and didn't boast. The kind of man, she realized with a start, that she could truly respect, maybe even care for. The thought scared her. It felt like a betrayal of Samuel's memory. But Samuel was gone and Kane was here. Kane, who had saved her farm. Kane, who treated her with respect and kindness. Kane, who was starting to feel less like a stranger and more like a partner. Winter came, cold but not unbearable. The wheat lay dormant under occasional frost, waiting for spring. Kane spent the winter months making improvements to the property, building new fences, expanding the barn, fixing everything that had fallen into disrepair. Nora worked beside him when the weather allowed, and spent the cold days spinning wool, mending clothes, and keeping the house warm. Christmas approached, and Nora found herself wanting to mark the occasion somehow. She used precious sugar and dried fruit to make a cake, and on Christmas Eve, she presented it to Kane after dinner. His face lit up like a child's. "You made this. It's not much, but I wanted to do something for Christmas. You've given me so much. I wanted to give something back." Kane's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Nora, you've given me a home, a purpose. That's worth more than any gift I can think of." They ate the cake slowly, savoring each bite, and Kane told her stories of past Christmases, working cattle drives in snowstorms, sleeping under stars with only a thin blanket between him and the frozen ground. "This is the best Christmas I've had in years," he said finally. "Being warm, being fed, being with someone who cares, that's what Christmas should be." "You're easy to please," Nora said with a small smile. "I'm grateful for what I have. There's a difference." The next morning, Nora woke to find a gift waiting outside her bedroom door. A pair of leather gloves, finely made, lined with soft wool. She pulled them on and they fit perfectly. Kane must have noticed her old gloves were falling apart and ordered these from town without saying a word. She found him in the barn, feeding the horses. "Thank you for the gloves. You needed them. Can't have you getting frostbite." Nora moved closer, surprising herself with her boldness. "Kane, I want you to know, I'm grateful you came into my life. I know this wasn't a traditional marriage, but you've been a good husband to me." Kane turned to face her fully. "I've tried to be. You've been a good wife to me too, Nora. Better than I deserve." They stood there in the quiet barn, the horses munching hay, the winter morning light filtering through the cracks in the walls. Nora felt something pull between them, something warm and real. Without thinking too hard about it, she leaned up and kissed his cheek. "Merry Christmas, Kane." His hand came up to touch where her lips had been, his eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Merry Christmas, Nora." Winter gave way to spring, and the land began to transform. The wheat sprouted strong and green, the first good crop Nora had seen in years. The rains came, not heavy but steady, and the parched earth drank deeply. The cattle thrived on the new grass, and Kane's careful management showed in their healthy weight and growing numbers. Nora found herself watching Kane more often, noticing things about him she hadn't let herself see before. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his arms as he worked, the gentleness in his hands when he helped a newborn calf to its feet, the respect he showed her in everything he did. One evening in April, they were sitting on the porch again, watching the sunset. It had become their routine, this quiet time together at the end of each day. Kane reached over and took her hand, and Nora didn't pull away. "The farm's going to make it," he said quietly. "We'll have enough from the wheat harvest to make the next bank payment and buy more cattle. We're going to be all right, Nora. Thanks to you, thanks to us. I couldn't have done any of this without you working beside me." Nora looked at their joined hands, his rough and calloused, hers small in his grip. "Kane, I need to tell you something, all right? When you first came here, I married you because I had no choice. I needed to save the farm, and you were offering a way to do that. But these past months, working beside you, getting to know you, I've realized something." She took a deep breath. "I don't want this to be just a marriage of convenience anymore. I want it to be real." Kane's hand tightened on hers. "Nora, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I care about you. More than I thought I could care about anyone after Samuel. You've been patient and kind and respectful, and you've given me time to heal. But I'm ready now to be a real wife to you, if you still want that." Kane stood up, pulling her to her feet with him. His hands came up to cup her face, and his eyes searched hers. "I've wanted that since the day I met you. I've been falling in love with you slowly, day by day, watching you work, listening to you talk, seeing your strength and your courage. But I didn't want to push, didn't want to make you feel obligated. I don't feel obligated. I feel like I've been given a second chance at happiness, and I don't want to waste it." Kane leaned down and kissed her, really kissed her for the first time. It was sweet and tender and full of promise, and Nora felt her heart open in a way she thought it never would again. This wasn't the desperate young love she'd had with Samuel. This was something deeper, richer, built on mutual respect and shared hardship and genuine affection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Nora Fletcher." "I love you too, Kane." That night, Kane didn't go to the guest room. He followed Nora upstairs, and they became husband and wife in truth, their joining tender and passionate and full of the love they'd been holding back for months. In the morning, Nora woke wrapped in Kane's arms and felt a contentment she hadn't known in years. This was her husband, her partner, her love. The months that followed were filled with hard work and growing happiness. The wheat harvest came in strong, the best in 5 years, and Kane sold it for a good price in El Dorado. They made their bank payment with money to spare and used the rest to expand their herd and improve their equipment. The cattle multiplied, strong calves born to their growing herd. Nora and Kane worked side by side, branding the calves, moving the herd to fresh pasture, making plans for the future. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, holding hands, talking about everything and nothing. Nora found herself laughing again, something she'd thought she'd forgotten how to do. Kane had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and he delighted in making her smile. They teased each other, worked together, and loved each other with a growing passion that made Nora grateful every day for the stranger who had ridden into her life. In the fall, Nora began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited, not wanting to say anything until she was certain, but when 3 months had passed with no monthly courses, she knew it was time to tell Kane. She chose a Sunday afternoon after they'd returned from church in town. Kane was in the barn, checking on a horse that had thrown a shoe, and Nora walked out to meet him, her heart pounding. "Kane, I need to talk to you." He looked up immediately, hearing something in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm pregnant." Kane dropped the horse's hoof and straightened slowly, his eyes wide. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. 3 months now." A grin spread across his face, wide and joyful. He let out a whoop and grabbed Nora around the waist, spinning her in a circle before carefully setting her back down. "We're going to have a baby. Nora, we're going to have a baby," she laughed at his excitement. "I told you God's timing isn't always our timing. This is the best news I've ever received." "When?" "Spring, I think. March or April." Kane pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still, flat stomach. "I'm going to be a father. I can't believe it." "Believe it. And you're going to be a wonderful father. I've seen how gentle you are with the animals, how patient and kind. Our child is blessed to have you." "Our child is blessed to have both of us." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Nora had some morning sickness in the early months, but Kane was attentive, bringing her crackers and tea, rubbing her back when she felt ill. As her belly grew, he took on more of the heavy work, insisting she rest more. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," Nora protested one day when he tried to keep her from mucking out stalls. "I know, but I worry. Let me take care of you." His genuine concern melted her resistance. "All right, but I'm not going to sit idle. I can still cook and clean and tend the chickens." "That's all I ask." Winter came again, their second together, and Nora spent the cold months preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny clothes, washed and folded blankets, and set up the small bedroom next to theirs as a nursery. Kane built a beautiful cradle from oak, carving it with care, and Nora cried when she saw it. "It's perfect," she whispered. "For our perfect baby," Kane said, kissing her forehead. The pain started on a warm March evening. Nora had been feeling restless all day, and as the sun set, the first contraction hit. Kane immediately rode to town to fetch the midwife, a competent woman named Mrs. Harper, who had delivered most of the babies in El Dorado. The labor was long and hard. Nora had heard stories from other women, but nothing prepared her for the reality of it. Mrs. Harper was steady and encouraging, and Kane refused to leave, holding Nora's hand, letting her squeeze until his fingers went white. "You're doing wonderfully," he kept saying. "Just a little longer, my love." As dawn broke over the Texas plains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. Mrs. Harper cleaned him and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Nora's arms. "A healthy boy," she announced. "Good size, strong lungs. You did well, Mrs. Fletcher." Nora looked down at the tiny face, the shock of dark hair, the perfect fingers that gripped her thumb. "Hello, little one," she whispered. Kane was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he touched his son's head with gentle reverence. "He's beautiful. He's perfect." "He is," Nora agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right until this moment. Kane looked at his son, then at Nora. "What about Samuel? After your first husband, he built this farm. It seems right to honor his memory." Nora felt tears well up. "You would do that. Samuel brought you to this land. Without him, none of this would exist. Our son should carry his name." "Samuel Kane Fletcher," Nora said, trying it out. "Little Sam, I like it." Kane kissed her forehead. "Thank you for giving me this, a family, a home, everything I ever wanted. Thank you for saving me when I had nothing left, for showing me I could love again." They sat together, the new family, as the sun rose on another day. The farm was thriving, the land was theirs, and their future stretched ahead filled with promise. The years that followed were full and rich. Little Sam grew strong and healthy, running through the fields, learning to ride almost before he could walk, following his father everywhere. Kane taught him about cattle and crops, about hard work and honest dealing. Nora taught him to read from the Bible and the few books they owned, and she watched with pride as her son grew into a fine young boy. When Sam was 3, Nora gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Emily. The house rang with laughter and chaos, and Kane built an addition to give the growing family more space. The farm continued to prosper, and they expanded their holdings, buying an adjacent property when it came up for sale. Nora would sometimes stand on the porch, watching Kane work with their children, and marvel at how much her life had changed. She thought of that desperate day when a stranger had ridden up with an impossible offer, and she thanked God for sending her exactly what she needed when she needed it most. Kane caught her watching one day and walked over, pulling her into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" "About how lucky I am. About how a cowboy showed up with seed and a wedding ring and saved my life." "I think we saved each other," Kane said. "You gave me a home and a purpose. You gave me love when I thought I'd spend my life alone. That's worth more than all the land in Texas. I love you, Kane Fletcher." "I love you too, Nora Fletcher, always and forever." They kissed on the porch as the sun set over their thriving farm, their children playing in the yard, the cattle lowing in the pasture, the wheat rustling in the gentle breeze. It was a good life, built on trust and hard work, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. The town of El Dorado grew around them over the years. More settlers came, drawn by tales of good land and opportunity. The drought became a memory, regular rains returning to the area. The Fletchers became pillars of the community, known for their fair dealing and generous hearts. They helped neighbors in need, remembering what it was like to face ruin alone. When Sam turned 18, he took over much of the daily work of the farm, showing the same dedication his father had taught him. James and Emily, 16 now, were equally capable, and Nora and Kane found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sunset, hands entwined. Their hair was graying now, their faces lined by sun and wind and years of hard work, but their love had only deepened with time. "Do you ever regret it?" Kane asked one evening. "Marrying a stranger so quickly?" Nora laughed. "Not for a single day. You were the answer to a prayer I didn't know how to pray. You gave me everything, Kane. Love, family, security. You saved my farm and then you filled it with life and laughter. You saved me too, you know. I was drifting, lost, not knowing what I was looking for. And then I found you and suddenly everything made sense. You were what I'd been searching for all those years." Their oldest son Sam came out onto the porch, interrupting the moment. "Pa, that mare's about to foal. You want to come check on her?" Kane stood, then looked back at Nora. "Coming." "Always," she said, taking his hand. They walked to the barn together, their son beside them, and Nora thought about the continuity of it all. From destruction had come creation. From loss had come abundance. From a marriage of desperation had come a love that sustained them through everything. The mare delivered a healthy foal that night, and Nora stood with her husband and son, watching new life enter the world, and felt the rightness of it all. This was what life was meant to be. Hard work, family, love, and the land beneath your feet. Months turned into more years, and Nora and Kane became grandparents when Sam married a sweet girl from town named Rebecca, and they started a family of their own. The Fletcher farm expanded to include Sam and Rebecca's house, built on the north pasture. James announced his intention to study veterinary medicine, and Kane proudly sent him to school back east, knowing the knowledge he gained would benefit the entire community when he returned. Emily fell in love with the son of the El Dorado sheriff, a young deputy named Michael Garrett, who was honorable and kind. Kane gave his blessing, walking his daughter down the aisle of the same church where he and Nora had been married so many years before. "We're old now," Nora said to Kane one evening, watching the sunset from their porch, their usual spot. "We're experienced," Kane corrected with a grin. "There's a difference. However you phrase it, our children are grown. We built something lasting, didn't we?" "We did. The farm will go on after we're gone. Our children and grandchildren will work this land. That's immortality, Nora. That's legacy." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, that you were looking for land to build a life?" "I do." "Did you find what you were looking for?" Kane kissed the top of her head. "I found more than I ever dreamed possible. I found love, family, home, and purpose. I found you, Nora. That was more than enough." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. The land stretched before them, green and productive, marked with the improvements of decades of labor. Cattle grazed in the distance, horses ran in the near pasture, and the sound of their grandchildren's laughter drifted from Sam's house. It had been 30 years since Kane had ridden up to a failing farm and proposed marriage to a desperate widow. 30 years of hard work, love, struggle, triumph, and growth. 30 years of building a life together from nothing but determination and faith. "Thank you," Nora said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing something worth saving in a broken-down farm and a grieving widow. For having the courage to propose something crazy. For working beside me all these years. For loving me. Thank you for saying yes, for giving me a chance, for loving me back." Kane stood and pulled Nora to her feet. "Come on. Let's go see if Rebecca needs help with dinner. I think they're expecting us." "They always expect us. We're terrible about dropping in unannounced. We're grandparents. It's our privilege." They walked hand in hand across the yard, toward the lights of their son's home, toward the sound of family and laughter and life continuing on. Behind them, the farmhouse stood solid and strong, a testament to survival and love. The land spread out in all directions, productive and valuable, a legacy built on trust and partnership. Nora squeezed Kane's hand, and he squeezed back, a familiar gesture after so many years. They had built something good here, something that would last long after they were gone. And it had all started with a desperate prayer, a stranger with kind eyes and the courage to take a leap of faith. As they reached Sam's porch, their youngest grandchild came running out, a little girl of 4 named Clara. "Grandpa, Grandma, you're here." Kane scooped her up, swinging her in a gentle circle as she giggled. "We wouldn't miss dinner, sweetheart. Your grandma made apple pie." "You made pie?" Clara's eyes went wide. "The good kind with the crumbly top." "The very same," Nora confirmed, smiling at her granddaughter's enthusiasm. Rebecca appeared at the door, smiling in welcome. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready. Sam's washing up and the boys should be down from the upper pasture any minute." They went inside into the warmth and noise of family, and Nora felt a deep contentment settle over her. This was what Kane's proposal had created. Not just a saved farm, not just a successful ranch, but a family. Children and grandchildren who would carry on their legacy. Love that multiplied and grew with each generation. That night, walking back to their own house under a canopy of stars, Kane wrapped his arm around Nora's shoulders. "I was thinking we should take a trip next spring. Go see James at his practice, make sure he's settling in all right." "That sounds wonderful. Maybe Emily and Michael would want to come too. Family trip, I like it." Kane looked up at the stars. "You know what I'm most proud of, Nora? Not the farm, not the money we've made, not even the land we've acquired." "What then?" "That every one of our children knows what it means to work hard and to love deeply. We raised them right. That's our real legacy." Nora blinked back tears. Even after all these years, Kane could move her with his words. "We did good, didn't we? We did great." They reached their porch and stood for a moment, looking at their land under the moonlight. The same land that had been dying when Kane first arrived. The same land that now thrived with life and purpose. "You want to sit for a while?" Kane asked. "Always," Nora replied, using her favorite answer to his invitations. They settled into their chairs, the same ones they'd sat in for decades, worn smooth by years of use. The night was quiet except for the sounds of the farm settling in for sleep. Cattle breathing in the barn, horses shifting in their stalls, the wind rustling through the wheat fields. "Kane." "Yes, love. If you could go back and do it all again, would you change anything?" Kane was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not a single thing. Every struggle, every hard year, every moment of doubt, it all led us here, to this life, to our family, to us sitting on this porch still in love after all these years. Why would I change perfection?" Nora reached over and took his hand. "I love you, Kane Fletcher. More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "That's my line," Kane said with a laugh. "I say that to you. Well, now I'm saying it back, because it's true." They sat together as the moon rose higher, bathing the farm in silver light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The windmill creaked gently, pumping water from the well that had saved them in those early drought years. Everything was peaceful, prosperous, good. Eventually they rose and went inside, banking the fire and locking the doors. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room Nora had once occupied alone, grieving and desperate. Now it was filled with warmth and love, and the presence of a man who had become her everything. As they lay in bed, Kane pulled Nora close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Strong and steady, just like the man himself. "Good night, my love," Kane whispered. "Good night," Nora whispered back. She closed her eyes and drifted toward sleep, grateful beyond measure for the life they'd built together. For the cowboy who had shown up with seed and a wedding ring, offering salvation and asking nothing but a chance to prove himself. For the love that had grown from such unlikely soil, strong and deep and lasting. The years continued to pass gently. Nora and Kane grew older, their steps slower but their love undiminished. They watched their grandchildren grow, attended more weddings, welcomed more great-grandchildren. The farm continued to thrive under Sam's management, with James providing veterinary care for the entire county, and Emily and Michael raising their family on a property adjacent to the Fletcher homestead. On their 40th anniversary, Their children threw them a celebration in town. It seemed like all of El Dorado turned out to honor the couple who had become legendary in the community. The farmer's widow who had lost everything and the cowboy who had saved her had become a love story people told to illustrate that good things could come from desperate circumstances. Reverend Marsh, now ancient but still sharp, stood to give a toast. I married these two 40 years ago, and I'll admit, I had my doubts. A widow barely passed her mourning period, marrying a stranger out of necessity. It didn't seem like a recipe for happiness. But I've learned over the years that God's plans don't always make sense to us mortals. Kane and Nora Fletcher have shown this community what real love looks like. Built on respect, strengthened by struggle, and deepened by time. They are an inspiration to us all. Kane stood to respond, pulling Nora up beside him. Thank you all for coming. Nora and I are grateful for this community, for our family, and for each other. 40 years ago, I rode into El Dorado looking for land. What I found was so much more. I found purpose, family, and love. I found Nora, who took a chance on a stranger and gave me everything I never knew I needed. She's my partner, my love, my life. Here's to 40 more years if God wills it. They kissed to thunderous applause, and Nora felt tears streaming down her face. Happy tears. Grateful tears. Tears for all the blessings that had filled her life since that desperate day when she'd thought all was lost. Later that night, back home, they sat on their porch again. It had become such a tradition that their children had installed comfortable cushioned chairs and a small table to make it easier on their aging bones. 40 years, Nora mused. It seems like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. I can still remember riding up to this place, seeing you on the porch, thinking you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I was a mess, Nora protested. Dusty, desperate, grieving. You were strong, determined. Beautiful inside and out, you still are. Nora smiled, reaching for his hand. Their fingers intertwined with the ease of decades of practice. We built something good, didn't we? The best. They sat in peaceful silence until Nora spoke again. Kane, if something happens to me, I want you to know that you made my life worth living. After Samuel died, I thought I'd never be happy again. But you showed me that the heart has room for more than one great love. You were patient when I needed time. You were strong when I was weak. You were everything I needed. Nothing's going to happen to you, Kane said firmly. We're going to sit on this porch together for many more years. I hope so. But if it does, I needed you to know. Kane pulled her hand to his lips and kissed it. And you need to know that you gave a drifting cowboy a home. You took me in when you had every reason to protect your heart. You loved me when I didn't deserve it. You gave me children and grandchildren and a legacy. Everything good in my life came from you, Nora. They held each other as the stars came out, the same stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to partners to lovers to the cornerstone of a family dynasty. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring brought new calves and planting. Summer brought long days of hard work. Fall brought harvest and preparation. Winter brought rest and reflection. Through it all, Nora and Kane remained constant, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. When Nora was 75, she fell ill with pneumonia. Kane barely left her side, sleeping in a chair by her bed, bringing her medicine and cool water, praying desperately for her recovery. Their children took turns sitting with them, and the whole community held its breath, waiting to see if the matriarch of the Fletcher family would pull through. She did, but it was a close thing, and afterward both she and Kane moved more slowly, aware of their mortality in a way they hadn't been before. I'm not ready to leave you, Nora said one day as she recovered. Then don't. Stay with me. We have more sunsets to watch. She smiled weakly. That's a good reason to stay. True to her word, Nora recovered fully, and they had several more good years together. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The house was bursting with family, and as Nora looked around at all the faces, all the life that had come from her union with Kane, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Kane caught her eye across the room and mouthed, "I love you." She mouthed it back, "I love you too." That night, exhausted but happy, they lay in bed together. Kane was nearly 80 now, his hair completely white, his body showing the wear of a lifetime of hard work. But his eyes were still the same creek water green, still looking at her with the same love and devotion he'd shown from the beginning. 50 years, he said softly. Half a century with the most amazing woman I've ever known. You're easy to please, Nora teased, though her voice was thick with emotion. I know quality when I see it. Kane kissed her forehead. Nora, if I die tomorrow, I want you to know I lived a full life. You gave me everything I ever wanted and more than I deserved. Stop talking about dying. We're both going to live forever. I wish that were true. But since it's not, I just want to make sure you know how grateful I am for saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on me, for loving me. It was the best decision I ever made, Nora said firmly. You saved my life, Kane. You saved my land, my future, my heart. I'm the grateful one. They held each other close, two souls intertwined so completely that it was hard to say where one ended and the other began. Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 82. He simply didn't wake up one morning, and Nora found him looking peaceful, as though he were only resting. She held his hand and wept, mourning the loss of her partner, her love, her everything. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county. Kane had touched many lives with his quiet generosity and steadfast character. Their children spoke, sharing memories of their father. Friends testified to his kindness. And Nora, though her heart was breaking, stood and spoke her truth. Kane Fletcher rode into my life 52 years ago when I had lost everything. He showed up with seed to plant and a wedding ring, offering me salvation when I thought there was none to be had. He was a stranger, but he became my husband, my partner, and the love of my life. We built something beautiful together. A farm, a family, a legacy of love that will continue long after both of us are gone. He was the best man I've ever known, and I thank God every day that he chose to stop at my farm that day. I will miss him every moment of every day, but I know he's waiting for me. And when my time comes, we'll sit together on heaven's porch and watch heaven's sunsets, just like we did here on earth. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Nora lived for 3 more years without Kane, surrounded by her loving family but feeling his absence in every moment. The farm continued to thrive under Sam's management, but it wasn't the same without Kane to share it with. She spent her final years telling stories to her great-grandchildren, making sure they knew the story of how their great-grandfather had saved everything with his courage and faith. She wanted them to understand that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most desperate circumstances, and that love can grow even in the hardest soil. On a warm spring evening, Nora sat on the porch alone, looking out at the land she and Kane had saved together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those familiar, brilliant colors. She felt tired, more tired than she'd ever felt, but also at peace. "I'm ready," she whispered to the wind. "I'm ready to come home." That night, Nora Fletcher passed away quietly in her sleep, a smile on her face. Her children found her in the morning, and though they grieved, they took comfort in knowing she was with Kane again. They buried her beside Kane on a hill overlooking the farm, under a spreading oak tree. The headstones were simple but elegant, reading, Kane Fletcher, 1850–1932, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he came with seed and a wedding ring. Nora Fletcher, 1854–1935, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she said yes, and love grew. The farm continued through the generations, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding to the legacy. Sam's children ran it after him, and then their children. The story of Kane and Nora became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But those who had known them personally never forgot the reality of their love. It had been real, hard-won, and beautiful. A partnership built on desperation that became something transcendent. A marriage of convenience that became a testament to the power of commitment, respect, and genuine affection. In El Dorado, Texas, the Fletcher Ranch became a landmark, known for its productivity and the strong family that ran it. People would point to it as they passed and tell the story of the farmer's widow who lost everything, and the cowboy who showed up with seed and a wedding ring, saving not just her farm but her future, her heart, and her life. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, tempered by hardship, and lasting beyond death itself. A reminder that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings, and that true love can be found even when hope seems lost. The land they saved together continues to thrive to this day, green and productive, a living monument to two people who took a chance on each other and built something that would last forever. And if you visit on a quiet evening, locals will tell you that sometimes, when the sunset is particularly beautiful, you can almost see two figures sitting on that old porch, hand in hand, watching the day end together just as they did in life. Their love eternal and unbreakable, a beacon of hope for all who hear their story.